Let's spend a minute talking about case writing. You may or may not be interested in writing cases. You may want to use other people's cases. You may want to use other people's teaching plans. That said, if you come to believe that presenting real problems in front of students and you have a particular course that you like, you may find yourself wanting cases that aren't available either through Harvard or Darden or the Ivy School or NACRA or some other source. You may find yourself wishing for a case that would describe a particular issue, and then you may want to go off and write your own. Now, in my experience, there's a certain skill with case writing, and even many professional writers who've written for Fortune or Business Week or other kinds of business media often find it difficult to make that transition to a case method kind of document. One of the big things is that this specialized skill is different from the skill in leading a reader to a particular solution. So when you compare that with most business journalism, a case really wants to have multiple options as opposed to being led to a kind of emotional or cognitive conclusion at the end of the article. So in my experience, frequently professional journalists in the business sector struggle with writing effective cases. Some do very well and others not so well. Most cases have a particular structure. There's an opening statement, a half a page or so, that sort of sets up the issue. There's typically a longer section that has a kind of background or history to the current state of affairs. Cases that are stronger, in my experience, will have quotations from people they've interviewed and real sets of data as opposed to doctored or fake data. And it will include people. So even though you may be writing a finance case or an operations case, if you leave out the people and only focus on the structure of the problem there, it belies the question of, well, if you've done the analysis, then what? If I've analyzed how much this company should cost, then am I able to convince others that that's the price we're going to pay? And what do I do about the negotiation when the seller may not agree with my analysis of what the company should be valued at? So if you write cases that leave out the people, leave out the protagonists, leave out the negotiators, leave out the people who are affected by the decisions being made, you risk having a discussion that really won't see the broader context. Now, you might do that in a module where it's at the low complexity part of the scale, but for the high complexity on the front and the back of modules, please make sure that you leave the people in the case. And then, almost like a symphony, a good case will bring you back to the overture, bring you back to the opening statement, but now with a lot of additional data. So you sort of introduce the issue, maybe the protagonist or the decision maker, go through a series of sections that give you additional history, data, analysis, conversations, points of view, ideas that other people in the case may have, and that brings you back to the opening of the case and the issue that you started it with. So this is very different from, say, a novel structure, very different from a short story structure. In some ways, it's a structure that maybe parallels primary research articles that have particular segments, as you know. And some people will write cases with a different kind of structure. In my experience, this structure works really well, and it helps the students to get the information they need in order to approach the decisions that need to be made in that particular situation. One final issue, and that is we don't want them to be too long. Historically, some cases have run 50, 60, 70 pages. In my experience, students struggle with that, particularly in today's cohorts where everything is digital and electronic and 140 characters and so forth. So we try to keep our cases below 15 pages single-spaced. I've had cases that are 7 pages single-spaced that were absolute dynamite and had legs and would work for a long period of time. So length is not necessarily a good thing. It's a challenge and an art in case writing to get enough data in to provide multiple options, but to do that in a way that is concise and brief. Now, again, critics of the case method will say, well, the world doesn't present problems in that fashion. There's a lot of filtering that goes on through the case writer, and that's true. But the question is, if in 24 months or 21 months you want to compress 10 years of experience so that they don't have to deal with all these issues that they're going to face in their careers over the next decade or two, well, you're going to have to make some adjustments. We have a discussion in 90 minutes that may have played out over 3 years, 5 years, or even 10 years. We have a discussion in 90 minutes that's based on a 15-page case that summarizes 15 years of experience. Well, so yes, if you want people to just learn from their own experience, you don't need to have a program. In fact, they'd be better off not going to a program. They'd just be better off to go out and start on gathering this experience. But what case method will do is compress 10, 15, 20 years of experience into a 21-month program by virtue of distilling, condensing, if you will, multiple problems, 600 of them, in the course of a 2-year program. So critics will criticize that. I acknowledge it. I still think it's by far the best way to go about it. So if you feel like writing cases, your institution may not support that. You may not get any credit for it, and you may not be interested in it. It's up to you. In my experience, if I've got a course and I want to have some kind of material that will address that issue, and I can go out and find that, and it's real, and they got real people and real situations, and I can interview those people, gather data from that situation, and put that in front of people, it's extremely powerful. And I find case writing extremely rewarding. It's so cool to have that, take it into the room. Unlike an article that you've published, you've gotten past the reviewers. You have no idea what's happening when people are reading it. But when you take a case you've written into a classroom and you see people discussing and debating this situation that you have compiled, it's exciting, it's thrilling. And frequently you'll find out, whoops, I left out some data there, whoops, I didn't do that quite right, whoops, that didn't go very well. And your ability improves every time you go through that cycle. So I highly recommend case writing. Some schools have professional case writers. The faculty don't have to do the writing, they assign it to someone else. I always find that, sort of like trying to sing someone else's song. So I like to be actively involved in writing, even if I'm using a co-author or a senior case writer. I like to be actively involved in reviewing the drafts and changing the wording and making sure that, based on my experience, is this thing going to fly in the classroom? It's not a 100% hit rate. Some of them don't fly despite your best efforts. Some of the ones you didn't think would have a lot of leg actually seem to be very popular over long periods of time. So I invite you to think about writing cases, maybe starting with a very short one, 1 or 2 pages, trying it in the classroom, adding another one, and pretty soon you'll have a whole library and a repertoire that you have contributed to the field.